about to say, if you've noticed, I'm flip-flopping between emphasis on God and what he has done, and us being in situations that are troubling, perhaps. In all these instances, in all the things we've read, in all the things we've sung, the emphasis being we're never helpless. No matter how difficult the situation looks, it's only how it looks, not how it truly is. It's a matter of mental perception. Allow me to read Romans 8:28. You will allow me, right? We know that in everything God works for good with those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. The title of today's message is Spiritual Lemonade. We've all heard the phrase, turn lemons into lemonade. It's a figure of speech applied to when things aren't going quite right. Well, today I want to begin by telling you about something that Margie and I did this week. We went to see the Great Elephant Migration. For those of you that don't know anything about it, the exhibit is in Newport only until September 3rd, and then it moves on around the country. There was a non-edible invasive species of shrub and vines growing in India on the preserves for the elephants. It didn't just affect the elephants. This invasive plant was growing wildly and rapidly and closing in the habitat and overtaking what was the nourishment and food for those that lived in that area. It became a major crisis. What do you do when you have a crisis? Some people rely on their own efforts. We've been taught to rely on God. Or at least we've been taught we should. An unexpected solution came about. It brought both relief to the elephants and to the locals, the humans who lived in the area. They wanted to get rid of and eradicate this invasive species. And I don't know the whole story of how it took place, but people with wealth heard of the situation from around the world. And they sponsored artisans. They chopped down these weeds, these invasive plants, and they formed them into sculptures of elephants. It took a lot of money to keep, they told us, 5 artisans working for 3 months to make one adult-sized elephant. There are over 100. Little baby elephants, adolescents, matriarchs, and the males with the tusks. They're on display on the lawns in Newport. We have pictures. You can see them afterwards. But the reason I bring this up is that now this herd is now traveling the country. I don't know what other countries it may or may not go to, but they're selling, in addition to the exhibits, they're also selling these sculptures. And the proceeds will all be donated to certain charities that are taking care of things over there in India and elsewhere. So the situation was a major crisis, inflicting potential damage and death upon those that lived in that area because it was eradicating the ability for regular food sources to grow. And yet it got turned into a opportunity for people to use their skills and their talent, and now is going to fund the continuing eradication of these plants. crisis that with some thought and with some help turned into a good situation. The reason why I bring that up is because I've recently been speaking to you about the awareness of our mental response to problems and troubles that come up against us. I've encouraged us not to blame God, to be full of faith, to not blame God in the situation or even for the situation, but to ask Him to show you in the midst of it what you can learn, what you should do, how should you overcome as you pass through this. I encourage you to remain full in faith. And I read before, and I'll read it again in James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. We're told to count it all joy when we meet various trials. You know that the testing of your faith is simply trusting in God, produces steadfastness, and let this have its full effect so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. You see, when we endure things that come up against us, and we don't faint or fail in our thinking, then it builds spiritual maturity. It builds in us a confidence and a trust in God. It doesn't allow for, over time, fear to enter in when suddenly something jumps up in front and you have this trauma or this difficulty or this crisis. Because you know God has done it before and He will do it again. He is faithful to take care of us. In Corinthians, it tells us that God will not allow us to be tempted above what we're able to handle. If you think about that, that means that no matter what comes against us, there's always a way to get through it, around it, over it, under it, pass by it. It should never take us down. It should never take us out. Yes, God does allow these things to happen. We won't go into the multitude and variety of reasons why. That's not the focus of today. But these things happen. In Romans chapter 8, verse 28, it says that God works all things together for good. Even the things we don't like, even the things we don't want to have to deal with. But He works them together for good to those that love Him, those of us who are called according to His purpose. How many things have you endured that have now enabled you, when you see someone else in that situation, to be able to comfort them and to assist them and to help them? Had you never been through it, you'd be sitting there crying alongside, just as hopeless and desperate as they might be. But when we learn about and have experienced God's deliverance, it enables us to be strong in the midst of adversity and to assist not only ourselves but others. I'd like to describe or read it, an example from the Old Testament where God did this for the people of Israel. Now at this point, Israel and Judah had separated. They're two nations, two sets of kings, and Israel had turned from God. It begins in 2 Kings chapter 3. I'm going to paraphrase a little bit of it and then we'll read some. You see, the government had turned away from God. The leaders, the king, the leaders of the army. And so God had allowed another country, Syria, to threaten them, to prepare to invade and conquer them. Well, the rulers blamed God for the situation. Why hasn't He helped us? What's going on? We're His people. And they turned their anger toward God's prophet and the people who had spoken openly about their disobedience and warned them of the consequences that would come if they didn't return there also at that point was a great famine in the land, and food and fuel prices were greatly inflated. You can read that for yourself in 2 Kings 3 and chapter 6. But I'd like to start reading in 2 Kings chapter 7, verse 3 through 9. Now there were 4 men who were lepers. They were at the entrance to the gate, and they said to one another, "Why do we sit here until we die? If we say, 'Let's go into the city,' famine's in the city, and we'll die there. And if we sit here, we also will die. Let's go over to the camp of the Syrians. If they spare our lives, we'll live. And if they kill us, what's going to happen? We'll just die." So they arose at twilight to go to the camp of the Syrians. But when they came to the edge of the camp of the Syrians, behold, there was no one there. For the Lord had made the army of the Syrians hear the sound of chariots and horses, and the sound of a great army. So they thought to one another, "Behold, the king of Israel has hired against us the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Egypt to come upon us." So they fled away in the twilight. They forsook their tents, their horses, their asses. They left the camp as it was and fled for their lives. And when these lepers came to the edge of the camp, they went into a tent, they ate and drank. They carried off the silver and gold and the clothing, and they went and they hid it. And then they went back, and they entered another tent and carried off the things from it, and they went and hid them. And then they said to one another, "This isn't right. We're not doing the right thing here. This is a day of good news. If we're silent and wait till the morning light, punishment will surely overtake us. Let's go and tell the king's household." No effort on their part, no effort on the part of Israel. God brought deliverance, food in abundance, wealth. The next day, the prices dropped for food and fuel because of everything that had been left behind by those that fled. You see, God provides abundance. He has it in store for us. Whenever troubles come, we have no idea what solution God has prepared for tomorrow. And yet, at times, we get caught up in our own thoughts and our despair and our desperation and our depression and our worry, and we get all concerned about something that God has in his hands. We should not wallow in the despair of the day. We should trust God and look forward to the future with hope and expectation of good things to come, because he promised us he would do things for us if we remain faithful and trust him. So I'd like to read it again. Remember Romans 8:28. We know that in everything God works for good for those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. Remember that. If we love God, we can't love him as much as he loves us. And he has things prepared for us that we can't even imagine. So when circumstances in life go sour, don't let the sour your attitude. Watch for and expect God to turn that lemon of a situation into a refreshing glass of spiritual lemonade. If you turn in your program to the insert, I'd like to introduce you to a song in case you don't know it, called "I Know Who Holds Tomorrow."